Peace. Islam. Sheekamauga Alamassee-El. Coming at y'all live. Deep down. Alamassee Arabian country. Checking in live in Arabia. The historic town of so-called Toomsboro, so-called Georgia. And, these days, this town has kind of been in the media, being an abandoned town. They actually had a story that the whole town was for sale. But it turned out to be false. But I thought this would be an ideal location to kind of discuss the Moorish, the so-called ghost town phenomenon all across America, the historic ghost town phenomenon. Kind of want to tap in on why there's such the case. Why you have, if you really do the research and you kind of just travel, you're going to come to a lot of small towns all across the South, Midwest, and West. Just kind of just devastated. They're abandoned. A lot of old brick Moorish architectural style buildings are just abandoned and towed down. We're going to kind of tap in on why that's the case, but just kind of display Toomsboro. Check it out. Abandoned building. Walk down. Just kind of do a little walking. It's a whole lot of stuff to see, but time is limited, so we just want to kind of tap in. Let's see. Abandoned old railroad depot, towed down. Hella quiet here, but at one point, if you do the history on this place, it was booming economically. You know what I'm saying? But anyway. So just want to kind of tap in. So it's an interesting history on Toomsboro. A big reason why if you really travel and get out here, you're going to see a lot of so-called ghost towns, abandoned towns. The real reality of a lot of these abandoned old towns, the vast majority of them are old Moorish towns. Let's just keep it 100. They all old Moorish towns, been there a long time. And after a certain point, when you kind of dealing with the Industrial Revolution and all of that type of stuff, the advancement of the corporate culture across the land, a lot of these old towns these were economically booming towns, but again, they were booming in the old culture. The old culture that's a little bit more of a holy type of culture, more dealing with more so the Most High, dealing with more so kind of the divine right to rule type of deal, keeping everything in line with scripture, things like that, keeping it more in line with nature, more of a free mercantile type of culture, where you kind of get it out the mud. Creativity and merit is what's going to make you boom economically. You get your land, you work your land, and you take it to market. Individual, more agrarian, high technology, but more agrarian and more about if you show yourself approved before you prosper. The more corporate culture is not as much like that. It's more of a gang type of culture, where people kind of banding together, more of a mob rule, Roman type of culture. You know what I mean? So that's kind of what kind of prevailed through the plain after a certain point, mainly between 1812 and 1865. That was kind of the sealing of the fate of this land kind of being overran with a more industrial corporate culture. But it's all prophecy, it's all good. But you had a lot of these after, mainly if you really do the knowledge, really after 1865. It was already pervasive through the East, on the East Coast, the Upper East Coast. They brothers and sisters, unfortunately, more so in the New England area, the Northeast area, they kind of lost their sway. They kind of lost their way. They kind of lost their way along quite a bit of time before the rest of the country did. The South, the Midwest, the West. That's the real Mississippian heartland. The people in these places, and that's why they get such a bad rap today. They like to talk down on. A lot of times you see people talking down on Southerners, Midwesterners, the Mississippian people, as being like country and wild and violent and mean. Or whatever nonsense stigma they want to put on us. Well, the reason why they put that stigma on us, because again, nobody likes the real American. Because at the end of the day, the real American will never lay down and never accept ungodly filth and degenerate type of culture, like unfortunately a lot of the rest of the world has. You know what I'm saying? So, of course, if the original American is the one that's kind of holding firm and standing up, and we fought the longest, all the way really, we fought an organized fight all the way up to 1865, and then after that we still kept the spirit alive. People still shouted out and kept it going, even though a lot of our people have kind of just through generations of being watered down and having weak-minded, Roman-minded, weak men and women kind of being able to be artificially pushed into leadership positions within the community. We gradually have been watered down and victims of just constant war being waged on our people, but that's to be expected. But they still give us that stigma, and everybody got something to say about the real Americans, and they just don't like us because, again, we the only ones that always will fight. We like, our spirit will never let us assimilate. Our spirit will never let us just all the way bow down to no man. You know what I'm saying? We only bow down to the Most High. We only bow down to Allah. Our spirit, we were just built like that. We'll never just bow down to some type of culture that worships a king or some man. We just ain't gonna do it. You go all these other places, you're gonna find people just bowing down and giving up their rights and all that. The Americans will never do it. And it's interesting that a lot of people from these other places who have kind of just cowered out and given their rights up, they are always in a rush. They're always gonna break their backs trying to come to where we at. But they talk down on us for having this free fighting spirit and not bowing down. And they call, we thugs and criminals and all that. It's just really them talking about the free fighting spirit because we don't give up our rights. You know what I'm saying? They all want to come to this land, this remain free, just because of our spirit, because we the ones that fight. But then they want to come and talk down on it. You know what I'm saying? That's just very interesting. But they couldn't go back to their own place. They can't go back to their own land and fight for anything. Lay down their lives. You know what I'm saying? Like our people have done generation after generation. You know what I mean? Like they can't do that. So it is what it is. But interestingly, again, a lot of these towns after 1865 and really around the time of 1871, after the coup, where it was just all out, it was just on and cracking as far as bringing in the KKK forces, surrounding a lot of these free towns, a lot of these old Confederate towns in the South, Midwest, and West, and squeezing them. And anybody who was trying to hold firm, you just had to shoot it out. It was just on sight. You know what I mean? So it's interesting that, well, again, that's why we're going to talk about this. An interesting story happened in this town right here, Toomsboro. It kind of backs up a lot of the historic research we've been doing as far as what happened in why we have a lot of these ghost towns in the West. So in this particular, again, after 1865, because the Confederacy, we know the Confederacy overall was the last standing guard of the old noble culture that was prevalent in America. You know what I'm saying? It was the last standing guard against kind of mass industrialization and the mass corporate culture, Roman culture that they were trying to allow to prevail on the land, because it was all about money and business. You know what I mean? Here in Toomsboro, an interesting story happened. Right in 1871, right, and it's historically known that around 1871, the current version of the Ku Klux Klan was kind of brought into existence. So they had a man, a former Confederate soldier, and they're gonna say, if you do the research, they're gonna say he's a so-called white man, and they're gonna say he had a so-called African American wife, and it's interesting that they'll say it may or may not have been his wife. They don't want to admit the real Confederate phenotype was looking like yours truly. They don't want to admit who the real bosses and who the real fighters were in the Confederacy. So anyway, there was a man from Toomsboro and his wife named Matthew Deason. You can do the knowledge on it. Matthew Deason, and his wife her name was Serena Pullcat Johnson. And interestingly enough, Matthew Deason, a former Confederate soldier from Toomsboro, or he was from this area, he was elected sheriff of so-called Wilkinson County, which is where the current town of Toomsboro is located, Wilkinson County, after the war. This is a former Confederate so-called soldier, right? So, it's funny. They're gonna say he's a so-called white man. I mean, we don't know the phenotype of this man. You know, again, a lot of the records have been destroyed. A lot of when they ran up in these towns, they burned a lot of things down. They killed people. They lynched people who knew anything about the old culture. I mean, and you didn't want to bow down. You didn't want to submit to this new government. They were setting up this new military occupation. They were setting into place. You know, it was pretty much. I mean, you had to pay with your life. Let's put it like that. Either you became an instant outlaw. So it was kill or be killed at that point if you didn't want to give it up and bow down to this new corporate culture they were pushing. So Matthew Deason, Matthew Deason, former Confederate soldier, newly elected sheriff of Wilkinson County. Him and his wife, Serena, were lynched in Toomsboro in 1871 by the Ku Klux Klan. Now that right there, now let's do the knowledge to that. So they were lynched in 1871. More than likely, again, 1871, that was when this new version of the KKK, this new military arm of the new U.S. government was created. So when it officially became, it kind of stopped being a republic and became more of a corporation. So and you know, they hired goons, the red shirts, the Ku Klux Klan, a lot of immigrants, a lot of people who could pass to this new black-white demonstration they were trying to set up. You know, they funded these people. They gave them guns. They gave them training. They just brought them in. They brought them in large numbers of these people and gave them guns and trainings and just sent them out to hunt for anybody who wasn't trying to give up these allodial titles or give up that old culture. You know what I'm saying? It was just on sight. It was just warfare. It was gang. It was gang banging. That's essentially what it was. All through the Jim Crow era, all through Reconstruction, it was gang banging. All the so-called black and white race wars and all that. That was just gang banging. That was immigrant against original Confederate gang banging. And anybody who wasn't trying to kind of assimilate to the new order of the day they were trying to create, they was gang banging on you. You know what I mean? So nowadays you got gang banging going on in the so-called hood. You got blood and Crip. Back in then it was just black and white. You know what I'm saying? That's it's always been a color thing. You know what I'm saying? But anyway, they lynched these two people, and then after that, you can already tell that they probably installed this was the sheriff. They probably installed a new fake puppet sheriff, new fake puppet government in the so-called town of Toomsboro, and it was so-called chartered as an incorporated town in 1904, and you can tell. And I mean, the rest is kind of history. They squeezed this town economically, and then when they were done squeezing it and draining it of resources, it's just abandoned. And that happened to so many towns because, again, we've always had a thriving American economy, but again, it was under the old culture. It was more of a meritocracy, a merit-based culture, where individual men and women, they showed and proved what they could do economically, and that's how they thrived. It wasn't so synthetic, where you join certain organizations or you're a wage worker or any of these things. It was more of an entrepreneurship, being creative, apprenticeship type of culture, and that's how we thrive. It wasn't just go get a job, join an organization, be cutthroat, be a criminal, and you're gonna just get things given to you based on all the type of degenerate, lazy type of behavior. You know what I mean? That's just kind of what it became. More Marxist, more socialist. So you can tell that the town of Toomsboro was squeezed, just like many other ghost towns. They surrounded these towns, these old Confederate towns. They murdered anybody who was trying to step up. And again, the old Confederates, the people who descend from the old fighters, they kept fighting. So that's the only reason why we're still here and we're still talking like this, because these people never just all the way gave up. But the majority of a lot of these towns, they got surrounded and they got squeezed. You know what I'm saying? Because you break down the old militias, you break down a lot of this stuff, it's gonna be easy to send in. It's gonna be easy to send in your goons. You know what I'm saying? And put these economic centers under siege, which is essentially what happened to towns like Toomsboro. But now it's a ghost town. Now what they would do is they would squeeze these places, steal, bring in corporations, bring in and create industries, squeeze and drain these places, and then when they were done draining them and sending a lot of the industries overseas or whatever they were doing, a lot of foreigners were able to come up instead of the original Americans controlling the economy. You know what I'm saying? They would just abandon these places and just cast them aside. So the indigenous people in these places are economically jacked up. It's the same. It's so many, and then a lot of times the economies were destroyed by these industrialists. So a lot of people afterwards they were abandoned, and then a lot of towns, a lot of little towns, they got put under siege, and when they were going more in. A lot of these towns' old economies were based on more of an agrarian type of culture, an agrarian type of economy. So when they went industrial, a lot of these towns were not able to feed themselves. So they just had to largely be abandoned. But best believe, a lot of these old ghost towns, so-called ghost towns, are old Moorish towns who were thriving under the Confederacy, under the Barbary demonstration. And once the industrial demonstration took over, they became ghost towns. So anytime you see a ghost town anywhere, more than likely, 85% chance it's an old Moorish town. You know what I'm saying? And it was just, they put the squeeze on it. After the Confederacy broke down, after all these wars, and the Asiatic people weren't organized to fight anymore like we used to be, they were able to squeeze these places. You know what I'm saying? So that's why you got a place like Toomsboro now. Beautiful town now, beautiful location, but it's just full of abandoned buildings. They say you ride these back roads, you're gonna run into plenty of towns like this. You know what I'm saying? So just doing the knowledge on why you have so many ghost towns, and it was an interesting story of what happened in Toomsboro. It's kind of just, it gives you kind of a little bit of insight on what happened in a lot of these towns, a lot of the lynchings, a lot of the lynchings and the killings and all of these things. It was just gang banging, man. That's all it was. You know what I mean? They wanted the head honchos, the old sheriffs, the old princes, the old nobles. They had to go. That's the only way. You can't have nobles in an economy based on merit and nobility, and have a corporate culture. They're always going to be in conflict. There's not going to be any type of sequence in between those two type of different cultures or economies. It just can't happen. So, just doing the knowledge on that. Then another thing I kind of wanted to touch on was the fact that if you do the history and do the knowledge on a lot of people, a lot of the so-called old outlaws of the old West, the old Moorish outlaws, they call them renegade. They don't want to admit that they were old, that they were like Moors. That they don't want to admit that, but they'll call them so-called black, so-called cowboys, or they call them renegade Negroes. There was a real big phenomenon of a lot of people who kind of just instantly became outlaws after the Civil War, even after after the War 1812, after a lot of these eras, a lot of the Indian Wars, a lot of these wars. Anybody who still, even though their militias and everything were kind of defeated, they still weren't trying to necessarily give up their culture. So they would call these people renegades and outlaws. So you had people like you had a brother's name like Isam Dart, Cherokee Bill, these historic people. These are people who were formerly Confederates, but after the Confederacy, you had to kind of give up your culture. You had to turn everything over to foreign agents. A lot of buildings, a lot of towns, a lot of your money, your gold, a lot of that stuff. They had these laws where it had to go under so-called white supervision. Again, white supervision was just means they had to go under some type of agent of the so-called United States as trustee. So a lot of people who weren't really trying to bow down, well, you immediately became an outlaw. So after 1865, these people were considered outlaws. You know what I'm saying? Now, if you do the research, or even the so-called, a lot of the so-called fake black academic scholars, they want to claim people like Bass Reeves, the real Lone Ranger. But if you look at Bass Reeves' story, you're going to see that he was actually, they're going to say that, again, if you have a certain skin tone, they have this narrative that you were always a former slave, but you're going to see that Bass Reeves actually fought in the Confederacy. You know what I'm saying? They say he was so-called enslaved by Colonel, I forget his first name, but his last name was Reeves. More than likely, this is his family member, his father, anybody. You know what I'm saying? But Bass Reeves, he, after the war, some people, you either went one way or another. Some people remained outlaws, or some people kind of just had to kind of adapt and assimilate into the Union demonstration. So Bass Reeves became a U.S. Marshal, and he assisted the Union in helping to tame the West, because he knew the West, because that's his turf. He was a free Confederate. So again, a lot of these outlaws in these towns, and these western towns and all of that. If your town was considered a renegade, or you weren't necessarily trying to capitulate to this union industrial corporate culture or mass settlement that they were trying to do out west and in the south, your town became an outlaw, kind of an outlaw town. And you can look at some of these old westerns and see that. You can even look at that Netflix movie, that new Netflix movie, The Harder They Fall, where they had a all Moorish town, but the so-called leader, Rufus Buck, he was considered an outlaw, you know what I'm saying? Because he just wasn't trying to capitulate. That was all over the place, you know what I'm saying? But I say that to say, as far as talking about a lot of these outlaws, the majority of these so-called old outlaws and so-called renegade Negroes, Cherokee Bills, the Rufus Bucks, all of these people, these are former Confederates. Because after we lost, if you weren't trying to capitulate, you went out west and you was just considered an outlaw. You just had to bang it out as long as you could. But a lot of you so-called fake black, so-called academics, y'all can't claim, if y'all are going to claim the Bass Reeves, y'all are going to claim the Isom Darts, y'all are going to claim the Cherokee Bills and all these people, you also got to claim the Confederacy. You know what I'm saying? Because these people were former free-fighting Confederates. Most of them were, if you look at a lot of their stories, a lot of them fought. A lot of them actually fought and were from the Confederacy. You know what I'm saying? That's why they became outlaws afterwards, because we lost, nigga. Excuse my French. We lost. You know what I mean? And then one more tidbit I'm gonna add in there. Y'all got, it's a huge campaign to colorize and blacken up a lot of Moorish history in America. You know what I'm saying? One of the biggest ones going on right now, no need to call the names. No need to call the name, is that American Maroon, the American Maroon demonstration. No need to call the name, but no need to call the name of the purveyor and the leader of that demonstration. But again, if you so-called black academics and historians are going to claim the fighting Seminoles, the so-called fighting Seminoles that y'all want to label as runaway slaves of blacks, if y'all are going to claim American Maroon and you're going to claim to be Maroons, y'all also got to claim the Confederacy, because again, the Seminoles, the Muslims that fought all through Florida, Georgia, Alabama, and all that, who fought the Red Sticks, these people were Confederates, and they fought with the Confederacy. So you can't claim all these free-fighting gullahs, these Geechees, and all these people if you don't claim the Confederacy. You can't black up Moorish history. You can't do it. So again, you want to be a Maroon, you're going to talk about you an American Maroon, then you got to be a Confederate. You can't talk down on the Confederacy and talk about all this fake white supremacy, enslaving nonsense, but you want to claim to be an American Maroon. All the so-called American Maroons, Moors, fighting Muslims, they was Confederates, partner. So anyway, man, so just tapping in, wanted to do the knowledge on some of these ghost towns, and we putting everything in a proper perspective, you know what I mean? So that's peace. I'll tap back in with y'all later.